Posted by you/Lost Theodore. Lab creep. This is not as creepy, but I'm glad it's over, cause I was truly considering quitting my job. I'm a self-taught polyglot, so I became a language instructor and translator. A few of my students work on a virology lab in a teaching hospital. I go there once a week for their lessons. I'll try and describe the place. There's the stairway that leads to a hallway with 4 doors on the left side, 2 on the right and 1 in the end of the hall. The first door on the left has the secretary office with 2 desks, and a kitchen about 7 to 8 feet into the office area. The other doors have sequencers and other lab equipment. They're not important. So there were 2 guys that worked picking up calls in the secretary office. Let's call them Carl and Dan. Carl is a very sympathetic guy, always picked up lunch for the women, which are a majority in that lab. Big guy, we both like the same soccer team, so we had something to talk about. Dan was always quiet and he's the creep I'm talking about. We never spoke a word. But he was always staring. Now, I'm not usually creeped out by people, especially when there are so many others around, about 20 to 30 ppl worked there. I conducted the lessons individually, so between each one I would go to the kitchen to refill my water bottle. And Dan would always stare at me when I walked in and out. I tried to shrug it off, told myself maybe he's just weird. But it was every single time whether or not there were others around. This had been going on for over a year, and I was so bothered I came to the point I avoided refilling my bottle. I started taking an enormous bottle to work just so the water would last all day. I did consider telling someone, but what was I gonna say? Dan looks at me when I walk by his desk. Well, who doesn't? One day I walk into the office, to get some coffee cause I was really in need of some that day, and one of the doctors, let's call him Ray, was sitting at Carl's desk googling something. Ray is old enough to be my dad. Dan looks at me and literally turns his head to watch me pass. I don't know if Ray noticed. When I walked into the kitchen someone had forgotten the oven on with boiling water. I didn't know if it was on purpose so I poured myself some coffee and came to the door to warn them about the boiling water. Dan turned his chair around, his desk was just by the door and effing bit his lip while running his eyes over me head to toe. He never said a word. Ever. 1 year there and he was always silent. Ray turned and I don't know if he noticed the look on my face, he just said I'll turn it off, Marta forgot it, while looking menacingly at Dan. I walked out unsure if I was trembling, and this time Dan didn't follow with his eyes. I know it was barely anything, but I felt really grateful to Ray. Anyways, New Year's came, the holiday break was over and I come back to work. 2 weeks in and I find out all the staff that were not public workers had been fired by the university. Including Dan. I never felt so relieved in my entire life. I wanted to share that. I hope he never finds a job again, that disgusting pervert. Posted by you/Tiny Baby Crow. Lyft driver with an agenda attempts to destroy my eardrums. I'll get right to it. My car died a little while back, and I have been using Lyft to get around town as needed. I am within walking distance to a good variety of stores, so it hasn't been too pricey for me. However, I recently needed to go to the pharmacy and the pet supply store, both too far to walk. So, I go to the pharmacy, pick up my prescription, and call my ride to the pet supply store. The driver who picked me up seemed initially very polite, asking how my day was, commenting on the weather, etc. But things got weird very fast. He abruptly asked me if I was hungry. When I said no, he began to insist that we stop at a restaurant to get food, and would not stop until I lied and said that I had just eaten a large lunch. Then he asked if I wanted to get a coffee. Again, no. He backed off and turned up the radio. A minute later, he asked if I like music, and if I like to dance. I answered that I don't care for dancing, to which he asked, well, why not? Then he asked if I like to drink, and if so, what bars do I like? I felt very uncomfortable at this point, and said I do not drink much. Well, why not? He asked again. Not even a little. Not even a little here and there. I lied that alcohol makes me nauseous. Then he asked if I live alone. I said no, that I live with my husband. He asked how long I have been married, and if I am happy with my husband. Then, he casually asked if my husband is a strong guy, and if he hits the gym. I began to feel very panicked at this point. Why would this guy want to know if I live alone, or how physically strong my husband is? He was being very pleasant and cheerful the whole time, but staring intently at me through the rear view mirror, which disturbed me. I lied, lie number 3, that my husband was military, and that I was so happy to have him home with me. He became disinterested after I began gushing about my husband and abruptly turned up the radio, so loud it hurt my ears in the back seat. I'm not even kidding, the windows were vibrating from the noise. We arrived at the pet supply store. I jumped out of the car and hurried away. Once in the store, I took my time perusing the aisles, to ensure that the driver had left. I stayed there nearly 40 minutes. It was rush hour, so I was fairly confident he had received another passenger request and left. After buying feed for my bunny, I headed out and requested another ride. I kid you not, dude was waiting in the parking lot, and whipped his car out in front of me as soon as I walked out the doors. He accepted my ride request after blocking me from walking into the parking lot, jumped out of his car, and took my bag of feed out of my hands and bundled it into the car. It all happened very quickly, and looking back, I should have cancelled my ride then and there. I regret not putting my foot down and calling him out on his creepiness. Anyhow, I freeze up and start panicking. I tell myself that I'm being dramatic, and that it's all just a coincidence. I get in his car and realize with misery that my home address is logged into his GPS. He is very jolly now, and asks if I'll be happy to get home. I had a stroke of genius and lied, number 4, that I was visiting my friend for dinner, but oh yes. I can't wait to get home later on. It's been such a long day. He did not seem to like hearing this and gave me the loud radio treatment again. I arrived home and grabbed my bag of bunny feed so he couldn't try to help me carry it inside. The driver got out when I did and tried to push a paper into my hand. It had his phone number on it, and he said, "You will call me tonight when you are ready to go home." Yes, yeah bo. I demanded that I call his personal phone to get a ride home, after dinner with my friend. I refused, and he tried to force the paper into my hand, grabbing my fingers and crumpling them into a fist around said paper. I lied, #5, that my friend was driving me home later, and dropped the paper on the sidewalk. He finally gave up and got back into his car. I walked up to the door, but then realized that the driver was still parked at the curb, watching me. He saw me looking and quickly pretended to mess with his phone, but I suspect he was waiting to see if my friend would come to the door, or if I was lying. I casually knocked on the door, waited a moment, then pulled out my phone as though to call my friend. While making the call, I decided to turn and stare pointedly at him. It worked, and he eventually eased his car out and away. Once he was around the corner, I rushed into the house and locked the door behind me. The end. TLDR, creepy Lyft driver asks if I live alone, how strong my husband is, waits in a parking lot to give me a second ride, and tries to make me call him for future rides.